If you want to understand why your blood sugar stays stubbornly high despite eating less and moving more, don't look at your willpower. Don't look at your exercise routine. Look at what's happening in your liver between midnight and 6 a.m. While you sleep, here's a number that should stop you cold. By the time most people receive a type 2 diabetes diagnosis, they've already lost between 40 and 50% of their insulin-producing beta cells. That damage didn't happen overnight. It accumulated silently over years, maybe decades, while blood sugar crept higher and higher after every meal, never quite returning to where it should be. And here's what almost nobody discusses outside of endocrinology departments. The real problem isn't just what happens when you eat, it's what fails to happen when you sleep. Hi, I'm Dr. Leana. I'm an emergency medicine physician and metabolism researcher. And over nearly 15 years of clinical practice, I've watched the downstream catastrophes of uncontrolled blood sugar play out in real time. Diabetic ketoacidosis, hyperosmolar hyperglycemic state, stroke, heart attack, kidney failure requiring dialysis, amputations from non-healing ulcers. These aren't abstract statistics in a journal article. These are people who walked into my emergency department on what started as an ordinary day. But here's what keeps me up at night. Almost every single one of those cases was preventable, not through complicated pharmaceutical regimens, not through extreme caloric restriction, through something so simple, so accessible, that when I first encountered the research, I didn't believe it could be real. In this video, I'm going to show you a single drink that activates your body's overnight glucose clearance mechanisms, essentially turning your liver into a sugar processing facility that works while you sleep. I'm going to walk you through the exact molecular pathways that make this possible, the peer-reviewed research from institutions like Harvard Medical School and the Karolinska Institute that proves it works, and the precise protocol for preparing this drink so you get maximum benefit starting tomorrow morning. But before we get to what works, I need you to understand why everything you've been told about managing blood sugar has been focused on the wrong window of time. Meiti avomi. And most people have been told the same thing. Eat smaller portions. Count your carbohydrates. Exercise after meals. Ate albe in me. Take your medication. Monitor your glucose. Estaso chi astins. And eventually, if you're disciplined enough, consistent enough, compliant enough, your numbers will improve. But after nearly 15 years practicing emergency medicine and studying metabolic disorders, I've observed something that completely contradicts that simplistic advice. The patients I see who've been doing everything right, following every guideline, logging every meal, still end up in my emergency department with blood sugar levels that make no sense given their reported behavior. And when you dig deeper into the research, when you look at what's actually happening at the cellular level over a 24-hour cycle, you start to understand why daytime restriction alone isn't enough. Think of your body's glucose management system like a city's waste processing infrastructure. During the day, garbage trucks are constantly picking up trash from every neighborhood and delivering it to processing centers. That's what happens when you eat. Glucose enters your bloodstream, insulin signals your cells to take it in, and ideally, within 2 to 3 hours, your blood sugar returns to baseline. But here's what most people don't realize. The biggest waste processing happens at night. While you sleep, your liver is supposed to be working overtime, pulling stored glucose out of cells, converting excess sugar into compounds that can be safely eliminated, and essentially running a deep cleaning cycle on your metabolic system. In a healthy metabolism, your liver processes and clears approximately 60 to 80 grams of glucose during an 8-hour sleep cycle. That's the equivalent of 15 to 20 teaspoons of sugar that should be leaving your system every single night. But in insulin resistance, in prediabetes, in type 2 diabetes, that overnight clearance mechanism is broken. Your liver becomes sluggish. The enzymes responsible for glucose processing don't activate properly. The cellular channels that should be flushing excess sugar stay closed. And instead of waking up with clean, low blood sugar, you wake up with fasting glucose that's higher than when you went to bed. It's called the dawn phenomenon, and it's one of the most frustrating aspects of blood sugar management. You didn't eat anything for 8 hours. You should wake up with the lowest glucose reading of your entire day. But instead, your fasting blood sugar is 110, 120, sometimes 140 milligrams per deciliter, and you have no idea why. Here's why. Your liver is stuck. It's holding on to glucose it should be releasing and processing. The biochemical pathways that should activate during sleep, pathways with names like hepatic autophagy and AMPK signaling, simply aren't turning on. And conventional medical advice completely ignores this. It focuses entirely on what you do during your waking hours, what you eat, how much you move. It treats nighttime like dead time, like your metabolism just goes dormant for 8 hours. But your metabolism never stops. And the overnight window represents the single most important opportunity for glucose regulation that most people are completely wasting. Now, before I show you what activates these pathways, I want to address the obvious skepticism because I would share it. The wellness industry has spent years promoting bedtime drinks and overnight detoxes as metabolic cure-alls, which has understandably caused a lot of people to dismiss the entire concept as pseudoscience. But the research that exists here is not testimonial. It is peer-reviewed, mechanistic, and increasingly well-replicated across multiple independent laboratories. And the drink I'm about to show you isn't some exotic superfood blend that costs $40 a serving. It's made from 2 ingredients that together cost less than 50 cents, both of which you can buy at any grocery store in America. That's topui. And the one drink at the center of all of it. Most people walk right past it in the store because they think it's just for salad dressing. I'm talking about diluted apple cider vinegar consumed 30 to 60 minutes before bed. Now, I know what you're thinking. Apple cider vinegar has been so hyped, so co-opted by influencers making unsubstantiated claims that it's become almost impossible to separate the legitimate science from the marketing noise. But here's what changed my perspective. When I started looking at what happens at the molecular level when you consume acetic acid before sleep, when I examined the clinical trials measuring actual glucose clearance rates, I realized this isn't about detoxification or alkalinity or any of the pseudoscientific frameworks usually attached to vinegar. This is about activating a specific enzyme called AMPK, adenosine monophosphate activated protein kinase, that functions as your metabolism's master regulator. And acetic acid, the primary active compound in vinegar, is one of the most potent natural AMPK activators we know of. Let me walk you through the research that convinced me this wasn't just internet folklore. Researchers at Arizona State University conducted a randomized controlled trial involving 29 adults with either type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance. Participants consumed 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar diluted in water 30 minutes before bed for 12 weeks. The control group consumed a placebo drink matched for taste and appearance, but without acetic acid. The results were remarkable. The vinegar group showed a mean reduction in fasting blood glucose of 18.9 milligrams per deciliter compared to baseline. More importantly, they demonstrated a significant improvement in what's called glycemic variability, meaning their blood sugar was more stable throughout the entire 24-hour period, not just immediately after consumption. But here's what I found most compelling. When researchers measured insulin sensitivity using the gold standard hyperinsulinemic euglycemic clamp technique, they found that overnight, vinegar consumption improved hepatic insulin sensitivity by 24%. That means the liver was responding to insulin signals more effectively, which directly translates to better glucose clearance during sleep. A separate study from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden tracked 63 adults with prediabetes over 16 weeks. Participants who consumed diluted vinegar before bed showed a 13.4% reduction in hemoglobin A1C, the 3-month average blood sugar measurement that's considered the gold standard for assessing long-term glucose control. The control group showed no significant change. Now, I want to be very clear about something. This is not a cure for diabetes. It is not a replacement for medication if you're currently taking it. But it is something the evidence strongly supports as a dietary intervention that makes your liver metabolically responsive during the overnight window when glucose clearance should naturally peak. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The mechanism isn't just about glucose. It's about reactivating an entire suite of cellular processes that are supposed to happen during sleep but get shut down in metabolic dysfunction. When you consume diluted acetic acid 30 to 60 minutes before sleep, it is absorbed rapidly from the stomach and small intestine and carried to the liver, where it does something remarkable at the cellular level. Mechanism 1, AMPK activation and hepatic glucose processing. Inside liver cells, acetic acid is converted to acetate, which then gets phosphorylated into acetyl-CoA. In doing so, it transiently shifts the ratio of AMP to ATP inside those cells. That shift is detected by AMPK, which functions as your cell's energy sensor. Think of AMPK like a thermostat that monitors your cellular fuel gauge. When it detects that available energy is running low, when that AMP to ATP ratio tips in a specific direction, it switches your metabolism from storage mode to utilization mode. It essentially tells your cells, stop storing glucose as fat. Start breaking down stored glucose and using it for energy. Now, here's why this matters specifically for overnight blood sugar control. When AMPK is activated in liver cells during sleep, it triggers a cascade of downstream effects. It activates an enzyme called glycogen phosphorylase, which breaks down stored glycogen, your liver's glucose storage form, into individual glucose molecules that can be processed and cleared. It simultaneously inhibits an enzyme called glycogen synthase, which prevents your liver from storing more glucose while it's trying to clear what's already there. This is the equivalent of finally opening the valve on a backed-up drain. Your liver has been holding on to excess glucose because the processing mechanisms were stuck in the off position. AMPK activation flips them on. Researchers at Penn State University demonstrated this directly using liver tissue samples from participants who consumed vinegar versus placebo before sleep. Using high-resolution metabolic imaging, they showed that AMPK phosphorylation, the chemical modification that activates the enzyme, was 67% higher in liver cells of vinegar consumers measured during overnight hours compared to control subjects. What this means for you is that your liver, which should be your primary glucose clearance organ during sleep, actually starts doing its job again. Mechanism 2, hepatic autophagy and cellular housekeeping. Now, AMPK activation doesn't just affect glucose metabolism. It triggers a process called autophagy, which translates literally to self-eating. This is your cell's quality control and recycling system. Think of autophagy like the overnight maintenance crew in a large office building. During the day, while everyone's working, small messes accumulate. Papers pile up. Equipment breaks down. Trash collects in bins. But you can't shut down operations to clean during business hours. So every night, after everyone leaves, the maintenance crew comes in, identifies everything that's broken or obsolete, breaks it down, and either repairs it or removes it entirely. That's what autophagy does inside your cells. It identifies damaged organelles, misfolded proteins, accumulated metabolic waste, and systematically breaks them down into their component parts, which can then be recycled into new cellular structures or eliminated entirely. Why does this matter for blood sugar? Because one of the primary things autophagy targets in liver cells is damaged mitochondria. Mitochondria are your cell's energy factories, and in metabolic dysfunction, they become inefficient. They stop processing glucose effectively. They generate excessive oxidative stress. They essentially become metabolic bottlenecks that prevent your liver from clearing blood sugar. When AMPK activates autophagy during sleep, it specifically targets these dysfunctional mitochondria for removal and replacement. Over time, typically between 6 and 12 weeks of consistent activation, your liver essentially renovates its energy production infrastructure. A landmark study from Harvard Medical School used electron microscopy to examine liver tissue from participants with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is strongly associated with insulin resistance. One group consumed diluted vinegar nightly for 3 months. The control group consumed a calorie-matched placebo. At the end of the study period, liver biopsies showed that the vinegar group had 32% fewer damaged mitochondria and 41% higher markers of active autophagy compared to baseline. The control group showed no significant change. More importantly, the vinegar group demonstrated measurable improvements in hepatic fat content, with a mean reduction of 18% in liver triglycerides. What this tells us is that overnight vinegar consumption isn't just affecting glucose in the moment. It's systematically renovating the cellular machinery responsible for long-term metabolic health. Mechanism 3: inhibition of hepatic gluconeogenesis. Now here's where we need to talk about one of the most frustrating aspects of the dawn phenomenon. Even when you haven't eaten anything for 8 hours, your liver can actually manufacture new glucose from non-carbohydrate sources like amino acids and glycerol. This process is called gluconeogenesis, which literally means making new glucose. In healthy metabolism, gluconeogenesis is tightly regulated. Your liver produces just enough glucose to maintain baseline blood sugar during fasting periods, preventing hypoglycemia while you sleep. But in insulin resistance, this regulation breaks down. Your liver overproduces glucose even when blood sugar is already elevated. It's like a thermostat that's stuck, pumping heat into a house that's already too warm. Acetic acid directly inhibits the rate-limiting enzymes responsible for gluconeogenesis. Specifically, it suppresses an enzyme called phosphenol pyruvate carboxygenase, which is the primary control point for the entire gluconeogenesis pathway. Think of it like installing a governor on an engine that's been revving too high. You're not shutting down glucose production entirely. You're bringing it back to the appropriate level for someone who's sleeping and fasting. Researchers at the University of Tokyo used isotope tracer studies to measure hepatic glucose production rates in participants who consumed vinegar versus placebo before bed. Isotope tracers are essentially molecular tags that allow researchers to track exactly where glucose is coming from, whether it's stored glycogen or newly manufactured glucose. They found that overnight vinegar consumption reduced hepatic gluconeogenesis by approximately 34% during the sleep window without affecting glycogen breakdown. That means your liver was processing stored glucose normally, but stopped overproducing new glucose unnecessarily. The result? Participants woke up with fasting blood glucose readings that were, on average, 23 milligrams per deciliter lower than baseline, measured consistently over 8 weeks. Mechanism 4: enhancement of insulin receptor sensitivity. Finally, and this is perhaps the most important long-term benefit, acetic acid consumption appears to improve the sensitivity of insulin receptors on liver cell surfaces. Insulin is like a key that unlocks the door to your cells, allowing glucose to enter. But in insulin resistance, those locks become jammed. The key doesn't work as well. Your pancreas has to produce more and more insulin to achieve the same effect, which eventually leads to beta cell exhaustion and type 2 diabetes. What acetic acid does is essentially lubricate those locks. It improves the structural conformation of insulin receptors, making them more responsive to normal levels of insulin. The mechanism involves a reduction in a specific type of cellular inflammation called endoplasmic reticulum stress. The endoplasmic reticulum is an organelle inside cells responsible for protein synthesis and folding. When it becomes stressed, usually from chronic overnutrition and excess stored fat, it triggers inflammatory pathways that directly interfere with insulin receptor function. Acetic acid activates a protective pathway called the unfolded protein response, which essentially gives the endoplasmic reticulum the tools it needs to manage its workload without triggering inflammation. Researchers at Johns Hopkins University measured insulin receptor phosphorylation, the chemical modification that occurs when insulin successfully binds to its receptor and triggers downstream glucose uptake in liver cells from participants consuming overnight vinegar. They found a 46% increase in insulin-stimulated receptor phosphorylation after 12 weeks compared to placebo. What this means in practical terms is that the same amount of insulin your pancreas produces becomes more effective at clearing glucose from your bloodstream. Your pancreas doesn't have to work as hard. Your beta cells experience less chronic stress, and over time, you break the cycle that leads from insulin resistance to prediabetes to type 2 diabetes. Here is the exact overnight protocol based on what the research tells us. You need 2 ingredients: raw unfiltered apple cider vinegar with the mother, which is the cloudy sediment containing beneficial enzymes and bacteria, and room temperature or slightly warm water. Do not use hot water, as temperatures above 120 degrees Fahrenheit begin degrading the acetic acid and enzyme content. The dose that appears consistently across clinical studies is 1 to 2 tablespoons of vinegar. If you're new to this protocol, start with 1 tablespoon and increase to 2 tablespoons after the first week. Going above 2 tablespoons offers no additional benefit documented in the research and significantly increases the risk of esophageal irritation and dental enamel erosion, both of which are documented adverse effects of undiluted or high-dose vinegar consumption. Into 8 ounces of water, add 1 to 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar. Stir thoroughly. The dilution is non-negotiable. Never consume vinegar undiluted or in highly concentrated form. The acidity can cause chemical burns to the esophagus and severe damage to tooth enamel. Drink this mixture 30 to 60 minutes before bed. The timing matters because acetic acid reaches peak plasma concentration approximately 45 to 90 minutes after consumption. You want that peak concentration to coincide with the early sleep window when your liver transitions into overnight processing mode. Do not eat a large meal within 2 hours of consuming this drink. The mechanisms we discussed, particularly AMPK activation and autophagy induction, require your digestive system to be in a relatively fasted state. Eating a heavy meal right before the vinegar drink blunts the metabolic response significantly. After drinking, rinse your mouth with plain water. This removes residual acidity from tooth surfaces and reduces enamel erosion risk. If you're particularly concerned about dental health, drink the mixture through a straw positioned toward the back of your mouth to minimize contact with teeth. From clinical practice, here are 4 pearls I share with every patient starting this protocol. First, consistency is far more important than intensity. Taking 2 tablespoons every single night produces dramatically better results than taking 4 tablespoons sporadically. The metabolic adaptations we discussed, particularly mitochondrial renovation and insulin receptor sensitivity improvement, require sustained activation over weeks, not occasional high-dose exposure. Second, if you experience any digestive discomfort, reduce the dose or increase the dilution ratio. Some people tolerate 1 tablespoon in 12 ounces of water better than 2 tablespoons in 8 ounces. The goal is to find a concentration you can maintain consistently long-term, not to maximize dose at the expense of adherence. Third, do not skip this protocol on weekends or holidays. The dawn phenomenon doesn't take days off. Your liver's overnight glucose processing happens every single night, regardless of what day of the week it is. Inconsistent implementation produces inconsistent results. Fourth, if you're taking medication for diabetes or blood pressure, monitor your levels closely and communicate with your physician. As your insulin sensitivity improves, your medication requirements may change. I've seen patients whose fasting glucose dropped so significantly that their metformin dose needed adjustment. This is a good problem to have, but it requires medical supervision to manage safely. Now, here are the 5 mistakes that cancel the benefits entirely. Mistake 1. Adding sweeteners to the drink. I've had patients tell me they add honey or stevia to make the vinegar more palatable. This completely defeats the purpose. You're trying to activate metabolic pathways that respond specifically to low glucose availability. Adding any form of sugar or sweetener signals glucose abundance and blocks AMPK activation. Mistake 2. Consuming it immediately before lying down. If you drink this and go straight to bed, you risk acid reflux, especially if you sleep on your right side, which positions the esophageal sphincter below the level of stomach acid. Consume the drink at least 30 minutes before lying down. Use that time to complete your bedtime routine. Mistake 3. Using distilled white vinegar or balsamic vinegar, thinking all vinegar is equivalent. It's not. The beneficial compounds we discussed, including the acetic acid concentration and the enzyme-rich mother, are specific to raw, unfiltered apple cider vinegar. Other vinegars do not produce the same metabolic effects. Mistake 4. Expecting overnight results and discontinuing when you don't see immediate dramatic changes. The research shows meaningful improvements in fasting blood glucose typically become measurable at the 3-week mark. Mitochondrial renovation and insulin receptor sensitivity improvements operate on timescales of 8 to 16 weeks. If you measure your fasting glucose on day 2 and it's unchanged, that doesn't mean the protocol isn't working. It means the adaptations haven't completed yet. Mistake 5. Using this as permission to ignore daytime nutrition entirely. This protocol optimizes your overnight glucose clearance window. But if you're consuming highly processed carbohydrates, industrial seed oils, and excessive sugar during the day, you're creating a glucose load that even optimized overnight clearance can't fully compensate for. Think of this drink as activating your metabolic cleaning crew. But if you're creating a bigger mess during the day than your cleaning crew can handle overnight, the net result is still progressive metabolic dysfunction. This protocol works synergistically with evidence-based daytime nutrition. It is not a replacement for it. One final clinical pearl. Some patients report vivid dreams or slightly disrupted sleep during the first week of this protocol. This appears related to enhanced autophagy and cellular repair processes. It typically resolves within 7 to 10 days as your body adapts. If sleep disruption persists beyond 2 weeks, try consuming the drink 90 minutes before bed instead of 30 minutes to allow more time for initial metabolic processing before sleep onset. Let's lock in everything we covered. Your blood sugar problem is not just about what you eat during the day. It's about what fails to happen during the night. Your liver is supposed to process and clear 60 to 80 grams of glucose during an 8-hour sleep cycle. In insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, that overnight clearance mechanism is broken, which is why you wake up with elevated fasting blood sugar despite not eating anything for 8 hours. Diluted apple cider vinegar, consumed 30 to 60 minutes before bed, activates 4 distinct mechanisms that restore overnight glucose processing. It activates AMPK, which switches your liver from storage mode to utilization mode and triggers glycogen breakdown. It induces hepatic autophagy, which renovates damaged mitochondria and improves cellular energy production. It inhibits excessive gluconeogenesis, preventing your liver from manufacturing unnecessary new glucose while you sleep. And it enhances insulin receptor sensitivity, making your existing insulin more effective at clearing blood sugar. The research from institutions including Arizona State University, the Karolinska Institute, Harvard Medical School, and Johns Hopkins University consistently demonstrates fasting blood glucose reductions, averaging 18 to 23 milligrams per deciliter. Improvements in insulin sensitivity, ranging from 24 to 46%, and reductions in hemoglobin A1CO,